Mr Chair.
Honourable Chester Borrows.
Thank you, Mr Chair, for the opportunity to speak in respect to this bill, and thank you for the Labor Party for articulating where they're standing on it and for confirming that, in fact, they are supporting the bill, albeit they have said that they are doing so with some reservation, because that wasn't clear for some time, Mr Chair, because what we had was, on the day that the bill was introduced, we had the Leader of the Labor Party voting for it, but then saying, if elected into government, that they would repeal it and they would quash it. And so I guess it's nice to have then the spokespeople from the Labor Party actually say what, or give some indication to their leader on which way he should be voting with respect to this particular bill. And if he's going to change his mind, I guess I'd ask that the Honourable David Cunliffe come down to the House and tell us that he's going to do that. I also appreciate the way in which members across the House have engaged with my office with respect to the preparation of the bill and the indications that they gave, and I had very meaningful discussions with Jacinda Ardern and Jan Logie, and also from Tracy Martin and Mary Pardee and others with respect to the bill. It's also important to point out that what we're discussing here, because we've heard a number of figures quoted comparing, for instance, tax debt to welfare fraud. And really, as they've been quoted, tax debt in the billions of dollars and welfare fraud at 23 million, we need to just acknowledge that you're sort of comparing apples with elephants there. Because when we talk about billions of dollars of tax debt established, we're talking about overdue tax debt, in other words, overdue taxes that haven't been paid, and a portion of them will be fraud, and a portion of them will just remain unpaid, as frequently does within business, and a portion of that will be penalty payments which aren't attached to benefit fraud. When we talk about $23 million in benefit fraud, that is fraud that has been established from actual people who have been prosecuted, and it is anticipated or estimated that the average welfare benefit overpayments established is about $1.2 billion. So you could make a comparison then between established overpayments from welfare being $1.2 billion and the estimated tax overpay or overdue tax is about $6 billion. So it's about 5 times as much. So then when we start looking at the energies that governments are putting into recovering that debt, it is important to note that we spend about 4 or 5 times as much recovering tax debt as we do welfare debt. So we have put a lot of new money into that. When we came into government, for instance, we've taken the budget up about 4 times to $138 million spent on chasing tax debt of new money in 2014, and we are operating from baseline within the welfare budget. And I think it's important to just make that comparison because obviously, as listeners would have heard, the assertion is being made time and time again that the government is more interested in chasing after welfare debt than it is tax debt, and obviously the energy put into recovering tax debt and the money put into recovering tax debt is well in excess, in fact nearly 5 times as much as we are spending on welfare fraud. And more of those people are being prosecuted, and hundreds of millions of dollars are being collected each year. So from those who are ripping off the tax system, it's very important to note that. Another important issue has been raised around partnership crime. The fact is that when you're talking about new provisions which will criminalise the behaviour of the partners of beneficiaries, it's important to recognise that this crime can only be committed by 2 people in a relationship, which separates it somewhat from other crimes where we also use a recklessness type of criminal liability. For instance, if someone is receiving stolen property or receiving property known to be obtained by a crime, such as a run-of-the-mill fraud, for instance, then their recklessness as to whether or not that was obtained by a crime is in fact their criminality, Mr Chair.
Honourable Chester Borrows.
So, although it's true to say that with respect of welfare crime, we haven't seen this recklessness aspect of criminal liability applied before, that's true. But in respect of living off the proceeds or benefiting from the proceeds of fraud, it's not true to say that this is novel and this is new. Another good point has been made with respect to particularly women living in abusive relationships, the fact that they had been manipulated or forced into committing crime, and I can see where the fears are in respect of that. And largely, the victims of this type of crime are women. But it is also important to note that the findings of the court have been, and I've made this point previously during questions around the proposals of this legislation, is that the court has found that a woman in a violent relationship is not in a relationship in the nature of marriage, which would make her liable to benefit crime, or benefit fraud. So I just need to restate that. What that means is, then, if two people are living in a violent relationship, the woman is usually the victim of that violent relationship. And if, for instance, she was accused of committing a benefit crime and it was obvious from that investigation, or she made the allegation and it was substantiated that she was living in that particular relationship and continuing in that relationship which was violent because of pressure being put upon her by her spouse, then she would not fall within the definition of living in a relationship in the nature of marriage and so make her liable under these provisions. So we are doing everything we can to ensure then that women caught in a violent relationship and being manipulated by a partner who is going on to live on the benefits of welfare crime actually cannot be held accountable in that system. But I would contend quite strongly that this law is about fairness, because as it sits at the moment, we have a situation where if a woman and man are living in a relationship and she is receiving the benefit and he has done anything at all to promote the gathering or the obtaining of that benefit, for instance, filling in a statement that they're not living in another relationship, giving social welfare investigators another address for where he's living, telling lies, etc., etc., he can be charged as a party to that offence now, and the criminal liability and the debt travels with him and her equally. But if that partner, generally male, just stays dumb about it and does nothing, but quite happily continues to live in that home where he's paying no rent, contributing nothing to the household, but taking the profits of that welfare crime, can't be touched. And what this change in the law does is says that if he lived in that house and he knew or should have known but was reckless as to whether or not his partner was in receipt of a benefit, then he is going to carry the whole of that debt as she carries the whole of that debt. They carry it together equally, and also the criminal liability for that as well. And I don't believe that there's a person in this house who doesn't think that that is fair. And so that is why out on the streets and across the organisations we've spoken to, people are largely supportive of this. What we do have, though, is the mantra that keeps going back to, I guess, along political lines, which says, you know, National will only favour those who are rich and will always step on those who are poor. And we've heard it so often before, we can recite that in our sleep. But the fact of the matter is this: on this day, in this House, we are talking about welfare fraud. And in respect of welfare fraud, we are going to be fair. Firstly, we're going to be fair. And those who choose to vote against this will have to account to that to the public they go to on the 20th of September. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Jan Logie.
And I rise to speak to the Social Security